Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ted Hodgkinson. I look after the literature program here at Southbank Centre. It is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's event, the first time that two world-renowned writers will share a stage together. They also happen to be avid readers of each other's work, and they seem to be in very good company this evening. It promises to be an insight into the creative process and also a rare celestial alignment of two prodigiously imaginative universes. Please welcome Kazuo Ishiguro and David Mitchell.
Just so the evening has some sort of a structure, we've zoned it off into subject areas that we think each other's work is rich in. The one we're about to enter is ghosts.
Were you actually afraid of ghosts when you were young?
Very much so. Actually, the first sustained narrative I ever remember hearing and keeping that I still have was actually a story that my brother told me. I was 4, so he must have been 7. And it was a story about a boy called Dave who wanted some extra pocket money. So he went to the graveyard, dug out his grandfather's liver and sold it to the butcher for £1. It's a true story. That this is the story that John told me. That night he was asleep, the parents were asleep, he heard a sound downstairs and he heard the door being opened. He just heard his grandfather's voice saying, "Dave, I'm in the hallway." And then the 10th step, "Dave, I'm on the 10th step." And Dave kind of probably lost bladder control, shall we say, in my brother's rendition. And so it's, "Dave, I'm on the 9th, 8th, 7th, 2nd, 1st step." I probably did a big jump in the middle. Entered my bedroom, because we can stop pretending that this is a third person. It was me. It tells you a lot about my brother, actually, who's a lovely chap and he's here. And then it was, "Dave, I want my liver." And Dave's mum, she drew the curtains open in the morning, saw him and screamed because there he was lying in bed with, what kind of story? I was 4 and my liver had been clawed out and instead put in the hole were the twirly-whirlies and the blackjack and fruit salad chews that I'd spent the £1 on. So most kids get a nice fairy story or something from the old Ladybird series, don't they? But I had that, and it's haunted me ever since. No pun intended.
Well, I have to say about that story. I mean, it's a lot of it's horror, isn't it? The thing that, like any other person, I've been scared all through my life of the idea of some kind of horrible, kind of gory thing like that happening. But it's a different quality of fear altogether about the supernatural. When you were talking about the voice going, "Dave, Dave," that to me was a different kind of eerie experience. I've always been much more scared of that. The idea of seeing a ghost, that has frightened me. It's a different kind of fear. You told me once that the first story you ever wrote, piece of fiction you ever wrote, was a ghost story. And me too. The first 4 things I ever published in my career, short stories, they were all ghost stories. Can you feel this distinction between the fear of the supernatural as opposed to having your liver ripped out? Or
I know which I'm really more afraid of. But I think once it declares itself, once it becomes a monster, once it becomes something that is potentially defeatable, once it loses that ectoplasmic, liminal, neither here nor there, once it loses that quality, something more rational kicks in, even if it's an impossible monster. A ghost story has to sort of do this high-wire act.
For me, there is something about the energy that comes from a ghost story. There is something about that force that comes from just combining a bunch of words together. You can produce this really strange reaction in people. Long after I stopped having a supernatural element in my fiction, I still try to aspire to that kind of effect. I want people to be haunted by whatever it is. While we're talking about childhood influences, did you used to play imaginary games?
So my earliest number one toy was It was sort of wire animals with a thin layer of bendy foam, and they were called twisties or bendies or something, and you could bend them in certain positions. And I used to make little superhero capes for them and spaceships out of tissue boxes. It was my world, and I had to be in control of it, as I am with my novels.
And you made up sort of narratives and dramas?
Long ones. They lasted for days. I had no friends as a child, as you can imagine. Just
this is when you were about, what, when 17 or something?
How about you? Were you a child fantasist?
I was. I used to play imaginary games with other kids.
Did they know they were in your imaginary games? With their consent?
I was thinking about this. I don't know how normal it was. I had a feeling it was normal. I mean, in the school playground, people, the default thing, unless you were definitely wanting to play football or something, you would actually play some sort of make-believe game.
Yeah.
And normally you would just kind of reenact a version of some favourite TV show. You know, the stories had to get made up. Kids were still playing war. So apart from the fact that people were divided between kind of Germans and the Brits or something, and I would always try and discourage them from having the Japs. I said, no, let's make it the Korean War, the First World War. but there will be kind of very elaborate scenarios that were conducted over, like 40 minutes or something of a lunch break. And the stories were being made up in collaboration. And then when I was just playing at home, I would play with 2 or 3 other local kids. And we'll make up very elaborate stories. That certainly, had something to do with my, very early experiences of kind of making up stories. There were lots of sword-fighting stuff as well, because people like Robin Hood and things like that. And we had the woods near us, so people play things like Robin Hood or Zorro or stuff like this. You can see how old I am. Yeah. You write fights. I'm a relatively inexperienced writer of violent action. And in my last book, for the first time, I had to think, how do I write, like one-to-one combat? And you've done it often over the years. But, I mean, when you try and tackle kind of action scenes like that, or indeed, fight scenes like that, do you feel we're kind of second best to the cinema people?
I think it depends what the desired result is. It's a little bit like jump shocks in horror films. That when something I don't think you can really do that on the page. Not in a way that actually causes a physical reaction. Yet I find myself writing narratives that are leading up to them and need them, and would find it quite a tall order to do a narrative without any kind of a fight. You do them, I think, but your fight scenes are psychological or metaphorical or Chekhovian, rather like Ghost. Once the first gun is fired, once the pistol goes off, it's kind of over. It's the pages and pages of leading up to it, of it was all a mistake and a muddle, and both sides want to get out of it really, but they can't, and it's this sort of thing they've set in motion that they can't get out of now. It's a poker game that they can't afford to walk away from.
The psychological build-up before the moment of kind of impact, you're very good at the build-up to the actual active moment. I mean, often in your action sequences, I mean, the build-up is actually very, very tense, because you often have a situation where people are plotting to invade somewhere. So they are the aggressors, effectively, but it's a strange mixture of being on the defensive as well as being on the offensive, because they are doing something against all the odds. In Jacob de Tourt, they're invading what's going to be a very well-protected fortress, or at the end of the Bone Clocks, they're planning this battle where they may well be defeated. The psychology, the getting inside people's heads, I think is perhaps better or easier to do.
In a way, it's everything but the exchange of blows is the interesting bit. The exchange of blows, it's there, it's factual, and it's done.
I do think you're peculiarly fearless as a writer of fiction. Do you ever have an idea and think, well, actually, that'd be great, but that setting is so alien to my own experience, or that genre is so alien to what I've done in the past? I mean, I'll be an idiot to take it on. Because I get this feeling quite often. I always wrestle with this. I have a great idea for a story or a novel. I'm in this situation right now, and I can think of an ideal setting. But I think, well, who am I? I know nothing about that time and place. I'd have to do a huge amount of research, and then still I'll be not qualified. But then I'm encouraged by looking at people like you, just fearlessly, perhaps recklessly, perhaps ridiculously, just going, you just go anywhere, and in any genre. I say to myself, well, actually, he does all this, but I'm sure he has his moments too where he backs off because he thinks, I can't take that on.
Firstly, I'm English, so I have to thank you for the compliments that you smuggled through in that rather elegant question-ish.
No, but it's a genuine question.
But yeah, sure. There's a big subdivision in the middle of it between genre and material. Genre, no. I mean, with the exception of 50 Shades of Grey, mummy porn, I'm actually attracted to genres that I haven't thought about or visited. You wrote your first 3 books up to Remains of the Day. I was living in Japan at the time. Then you brought out The Unconsoled. And it was such and this arresting, what? You do the Chekhovian short novels. Then you have this utterly atypical to what had gone before book. This sort of glorious, long anxiety dream, Germanic modernist mammoth. That licensed me to, well, if you're allowed to do it, then fine. You're some years older than me. That gave me a license to say not do another Cloud Atlas, even though that might have been good for short-term sales. But what's the opposite book to Cloud Atlas? I feel that The Unconsoled is the opposite book to The Remains of the Day, and had read about how I was Mr. ventriloquist, multi-narrative, postmodern guy. No, what's the opposite? This sort of short, quiet, one narrator, very English book set that took place in one small, tiny world, and that was the point, kind of kid. But then you did that again when we were orphans, a detective story that you broke, climbed out of, and did something else with. And then you brought out a novel which people in the more respectable end of the press were too polite to use the word, but it was science fiction. And then you've done it again, most recently with The Buried Giant. This omnivoracity, this desire to put a lot of clear blue water between your novels in terms of genre. That's the genre stuff. The material, I do feel more inhibitions. And you can always do it, but you have to do it sideways. You need a certain arrogance and hubris that I feel that you lose as you age and maybe learn more about technique. If I tried to write a novel wholly narrated by an American, I now know I would be a microtone out. And that microtone is worse than being 8 notes out, being a whole octave out. So you do it sideways. You do a Brit who's lived in America for a long time. You do a Canadian. There's always a way around it. So
in the past, you have written American voices.
When I was younger, I wouldn't do it now.
The last section of Ghostwritten is American,
It was, and I thought all you needed to do was soak up enough films and to make a list of out the window instead of out of the window. There's sort of.
But I've never heard anyone complain that it didn't sound American. But it's that fearlessness. Do you think you've lost some of that? I kind of battle with this. There's a part of me that says I have to go for it. I can see this novel or whatever it is waiting to be written. I should have a go. If it requires this particular setting, I should have a go. I'll do whatever it takes to try and make it work. And it may not be authentic, but I should try and find the courage. And you see, I have this list of ideas. I've been keeping a little notebook since 1981. If I have anything that I think is a halfway decent idea, by idea I mean literally about 2 or 3 lines. And it could be an idea for a setting. It could be an idea like a concept, or I write it down, and there are some that I come back to again and again, but I just think I can't. I'm just not qualified. I don't quite dare. I don't come from that place. I just don't have the first-hand experience. But then, as I say, I read very convincing work by other people, and then I know that they were initially as unqualified as I was, and so then I think, well, maybe I shouldn't back off. For instance, my last novel, The Buried Giant, in some ways, I would have liked to have set it in a real place in contemporary history, like Bosnia during the Bosnian Wars. I felt I'm going to back off this because who am I to write about this crisis when so many people who lived through it are around, and I'm just perhaps abusing contemporary history for my own ends there.
I wouldn't call that a cop-out. I would call it very, very sideways. They will see it, and it's okay as long as you really, really, really know your stuff, but you'd better really, really, really know your stuff, especially when it intersects with real tragedy. And you're making yourself very fair game and painting kind of hit me all over yourself if you don't really know your stuff.
So, based in your personal lives, how would your ghost look like right now, if you had to describe them?
If we were haunted by a ghost, what would the ghost look like? That's a sneaky way of asking something really personal about an ancient girlfriend, isn't it? But myself, aged 80.
That's not very scary. You just think, oh, that's me.
Would you? I mean, it scared the crap out of me if I saw kind of my old me just walking up those steps behind you, going.
Yeah, I guess that's slightly disconcerting. But I mean, as I say, it doesn't raise that very peculiar fear I was talking about. I do find ghosts of children quite scary.
Whose children? Which children?
Just any child. As I explained to you, I don't before. I mean, I don't really care. What. It's just the fact of they're encroaching into your consciousness that I find really, really unsettling. And maybe because of the way I was brought up, these kind of almost beautiful women ghosts, but they're not quite beautiful. They're very, very scary. My ghost will be like that.
That just sounds like a goth disco in Worcestershire in the 1980s. Worcestershire, we never got to Worcestershire. Why is Worcestershire in all of your books?
It's one of these kind of strange habits I have, that there are a number of things I just find almost inadvertently creeping into everything I write, and Worcestershire is one of them. When I need an English county of a certain sort, I write down Worcestershire. You've got quite a number of these tics, I've noticed them, but we should take a question.
I'd like to ask you both about how you conceive and structure the endings of your novels, because it seems to me that both of you are very, very strong on endings in completely different ways. David's novels seem to me to be so well structured and thought out that I kind of imagine that you conceive them years in advance altogether, and Kazuo's endings seem to me to be still beautiful but much more organic, as if they kind of emerge from the writing of the novel. And I just wondered, that might be completely wrong, how you think of them as you work.
I always have my ending before I start.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
that's the one thing I absolutely know. I don't know all the actual details, but I know absolutely the emotion I want to land on. And I can't start a book until I do that.
Mine is actually much more organic, and it comes from the process of the writing. No, I never know. I think of the narrative as a road journey through the alphabet, and I don't want to start from A knowing anything after about W. So the X, Y and the Z need to be murky for me still, and I'll find them along the way, sometimes towards the end. I like them to be completely unexpected as you're reading them, yet somehow wholly inevitable backwards. They need to have a retrospective logic, not a forward logic.
But how far do you go in the process before you find out the ending? Or do you sometimes are you quite near the end and you still don't know the ending?
It has happened, yes. Yes. Yeah. It's the writing of the book tells me how it will end. And the idea of knowing right at the beginning is sort of borderline odd.
Well, I don't know how I'm going to get there, but it's the emotion as much as the narrative wrap.
Yeah.
Do you have this experience that you come across a really powerful image or a really powerful scene, but you don't know how the characters or how you got there? You just this thing occurs to you and you really want to use it, because this image or this moment is so powerful. Is it cart before the horse? Is it right to put the kind of end result there and then work backwards to try and justify it being there? Because I do sometimes find myself doing that. And I suppose you could say that the whole enterprise of writing the novel, if I now I realise it's very odd, to have the ending in my head and to work backwards. But I do that in miniature as well. There is some scene that I am haunted by, it might just be an image, or sometimes it's some exchange. And I actually try and figure out what steps can I devise to lead us up to this, to just kind of warrant this moment. You never get this? You always go in a...
I feel possessed by the spirit of Sir Ian McKellen, who's just kind of coming into me now and saying, "My dear boy, I just call that writing." No, all the time. But this is in no way weird or cheating or odd or this occasion. This is writing for me. I do this every time. To use the alphabet thing again, I get to C. I've got a great idea for F. What D and E will get me from C to that F, because it's a killer and it'll be so juicy and satisfying and gorgeous, and it's radiating. It is radioactive with rightness. Got to get there. I mean, I want the D and E to be great, but one of the things they will also do is to be in the service of, I forgot my letters, but in the service of F or whatever it was. All the time-ish.
So it's not cheating? Probably
I think it's a weird morphing experience where the world-famous Kazuo Ishiguro is actually asking me for advice. I think I am dreaming, but... no, not cheating at all. It's writing, I think.
We should ask it. And somebody else has got the microphone.
The other person with the mic. Hello.
Hi.
Can you wave?
Yeah, I hope this is not too personal, but I was just wondering, let's say if you guys have an idea that you want to write about in a novel and you get into, the groove of writing, is there anything that you both would do as part of your creative routine, or what would you do to take a break to, refresh your mind from writing? Thank you.
You're welcome. Really quick answer. I go for a walk. Really, I just go for a walk. It always works. Something about the dun 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 dun, the left right. It leaves stuff behind. It's a place to think. The only thing I do, I've got this really bad habit. I do dialogue aloud. So I've got this reputation in this small little Irish village where I live as the village idiot, because I'm kind of walking around. No, I do it. It's awful. My wife's used to it, but so that's it. I go for a walk.
And you don't think about your writing when you're walking?
I do, but I think about it in new ways, and it unlocks stuff, and just a walk in the country.
I find escaping into music is quite good, because it's a non-verbal world. So I do find that recharges things, because I find if I sit down and watch a movie or something, I'm still thinking like a writer. I'm thinking, that's a bit, that narrative thing doesn't work, or that's bound to be a false enemy situation. That's not really an enemy. That's going to turn out to be a big friend. I'm kind of trying to do that all the time, so it's not a rest at all. So, but I find if I can escape into music, I'm absorbed enough in that non-verbal world. I mean, you're a big music person, but you don't use it to recharge your batteries?
I use it to
when you're
get
writing?
going when I start a writing session. I kind of want something on, something either instrumental or in a language I have no knowledge of. I find Brian Eno brilliant writing music. It sort of, especially his ambient stuff, it's sort of interesting enough to sort of propel you, but not so hook-laden that it pulls you out.
But you mean you've got it on while you're actually writing? Oh, really?
Yeah. Don't you?
No, never.
Never? Nothing ever?
No. But I am a musician. You have to. I'm a very bad musician, but I mean...
So he says...
But because I was taught music from a very early age, it is quite distracting. I can't just have it on in the background. I start thinking in this other language, but it's like someone speaking, so I can't... Even if it's instrumental,
right. So you're thinking about notes and sequences and chords.
I think. Oh, look, we're in a Dorian mode there. I can't really have it just.
Maybe it's my ignorance that facilitates the fact that.
I'm not suggesting. It is, but I'm surprised that you actually can work with anything actually going on like that.
Oh yeah, always.
What happens if there's lyrics? Is that...
It's never music with lyrics in.
Okay.
Unless it's a language I have no knowledge of. It's great folk Mongolian disc that I have quite often.
But all the time? You've got music going on all the time?
No, after the album or the disc is over, if the writing's going well, then I forget to replenish it. But it's sort of like aural tea. I need a teapot with the tea of the day that kind of suits the day I'm on and the weather and environmental factors, etc., etc.
You talked a lot about wanting to be very plausible in your writing and not choosing Bosnia for your setting in your last book. Do you think as you become a global name and your books become a global phenomena, it makes it more difficult to be authentic and creative?
I'm so glad that one's yours and not mine.
It's kind of what I was asking you in a sly way before. When I said, when we were discussing this earlier, I was saying, are you as fearless as you were 15 years ago? I don't know if this feeling that a lot of people are going to read you, not just numerically, but people from all kinds of cultures will look at you. And indeed, sometimes, when we're just projecting into some culture that we think is exotic, the people of that culture will actually look at it. This idea that you've got a wide audience can put the frighteners on, and I do try and resist that. Your second novel is narrated by a young Japanese boy, and I thought at the time that was a very brave thing for an Englishman to do. Once again, it's another example of this fearlessness. And not only that, you just take on the Japanese vernacular. Would you have the courage to do the equivalent now? I mean...
Firstly, neatly deflected. Secondly...
Well, in answer is yes. I've got more inhibited as I've got older, definitely. And more, inverted commas, famous. I've got more and more cowardly. What about you?
The Buried Giant wasn't a cowardly... it wasn't a book written by...
But in this respect...
Okay,
let's
one
not
eye
start.
on what the New York Times was saying about it at all. However, sure. Yes, somewhat. With Number 9 Dream, I simply imagined I was my own translator, translating it into Japanese. What would this kid be saying if he was British and not Japanese? It seemed like a really neat, easy solution at the time.
I followed the whole thing about, Western people doing Japanese characters quite carefully for good reason. I don't think I've ever seen someone do that. Actually go right into to use kind of English vernacular so freely to actually represent the Japanese language. We understand that this is a Japanese language underneath this English, but it's not that kind of subtitles English that say I used in my earlier books. It's a full-blown, kind of really characterized and very varied vernacular. People tend to use a much more kind of stately, formal kind of language, don't they?
They do, especially for Japanese, and there's times in Jacob de Zoet where I did do that. However, this may actually not come from culture or name or worries about how it would be seen or how it could be translated. It might just be, I'm a bit of a first-person junkie, as generally you are. Worse, I'm a sort of first-person present tense junkie, and you don't have subtitles when you are in your head. You don't have subtitles really in the present tense. It takes time to go away, have a think, and you can only have subtitles in the past tense. So just at the time I was simply going on what instinctively felt right. You can't not be aware that people will be translating this. And kind of it's not so much you change the language, but say if I have a joke, I wouldn't have a termite walked into a bar and said, "Where is the bartender?" I would have, because that's dependent on language. I instead would have a skeleton walks into a bar and says, "I'll have a pint and a mop, please," because that works in any language except English. By the sound of it.
Absolutely.
So I kind of think that much, but
I see what
other
you
than
mean.
that, we've gone some distance from the question here. But
I find that really interesting because I had to face that whole question about what do you do when the readers are supposed to understand that behind the English that is being used, there is another language. Everybody is speaking in another language. How do you represent or hint at a second language behind the language that you're using? And as I say, I've never seen it done so recklessly, but so successfully as you did. One of the things that's emerged, which I didn't expect to emerge from this conversation, is that in a small kind of way, fear and courage seem to be issues in writing. Sometimes you've got to be quite daring.
A calculated risk. You sort of decide where, in qualified terms, courage is going to be turning into hubris, and get as close as you can to that line, but stop, and there work out what it is that's so difficult about this, which is often what attracted you to it, but in the act of working out what the difficulties and the issues and the challenges are, just by articulating them, if only to yourself or on a piece of paper, the keys and the solutions are often in your descriptions of the problem in hand. Bit of a theoretical place to stop, where you can only to stop on a killer line or a joke.
We better go.
We better go. That's
we're going to get into trouble. So we should say thank you to everybody. And
must indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.